You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. As always, I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host Trey. If you aren't aware, Music Mausoleum is a semi-regular podcast ancillary to the mainline Cemetery Confessions episodes, the focus of which is to talk about and support and promote bands that are making music within the goth and dark scenes. We'll have a long-form breakdown of a specific album, and then we will follow it up with some rapid-fire recommendations, where you'll get to hear a little bit of one of the songs on the album and a brief description of why I think it is an album worth recommending. But before we get to that, we have a special guest on this episode of Music Mausoleum, and that is Sean Riddle. Sean is a Patreon supporter from our community, which is wonderful, of course, and much appreciated. But more importantly, he is passionate about building community, about promoting the arts, and creating real change in the world. So, Sean, thank you for being here. Before we get into the album review, can you share with us a bit about your journey into goth and perhaps a bit about the scene in Pittsburgh, if you would like to?
Yes, thank you, Danny, for having me. So how I did get into goth, I would definitely say it. It was the old classic songs, the styles and the characters that definitely get from the first wave. So mainly being like Night on Bald Mountain. So when I say classic, I mean classical
we're
music.
going way back.
Yeah. The originals, like Fantasia, or even like old DreamWorks films. If you might remember Chanticleer, there was the character of the owl. That was a very prominent character growing up, talking about never wanting him to crow, never wanting the sun to shine. The organ, the music, the drama. He even wore a cape and a little eyeglass.
Oh, I do remember this movie, actually. I didn't look it up, but
yeah, definitely. So I grew up with that at a very young age, because I was born in the second wave of goth. And so when that started to grow for the identity, you started seeing stuff like that in kids' films, and then the culture was starting to come out, and it was starting to be more accepted as an identity. So I found myself naturally going to classic gothic horror sources as I started getting older. But I saw the clear differences between how popular the culture was going into in the early 2000s and the difference between the emo scene in the early 2000s and just the scene culture itself. I remember growing up listening to U2 and Sting and Marcy Playground just from the cassettes that my parents had grown up with. But it just wasn't as dark as what I was reading, like in The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. And I wanted a culture of music that really talked about those deeper meanings. So I really found, Bauhaus, the masterpiece that is Bela Lugosi's Dead, to just be that art style that was from those classic inspirational works that inspired the imagery and the songs that would, it would always hold a place in my heart, and just exploring the internet in the early 2000s and just being outside of my own local scene from my friends from school, and just wanting to find like-minded visionaries and creative spirits that saw that world the way I did. Just a shout out to the random goth couple, Connor and Lynn. They were one of the first, that I had seen on YouTube about 6 years ago. Is when I saw a lot of, goth and alternative subculture genres and YouTube channels coming up more and more. Curious right now as to like why that is, just why now rather than later. But what got me really interested in what we're going to be going over today is just the consistency, what we've talked about in other episodes of, is the traditional style of that music something we want to hold on to in this culture, or is it something that is going to go away? So that's definitely something I look forward to sharing about tonight.
Definitely.
Album review.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for being on again. Really appreciate it. Let's do... Okay, so let me intro the band and the album, and then we'll play a track. And I'm going to take this... I took a few snippets off their Bandcamp page that I thought kind of shared their perspective of the band, at least, rather than, trying to go over their entire history. So from the Bandcamp page, it says, Temple of Angels, debut full-length, Endless Pursuit is a towering and stunning album of gothic beauty that heralds the proper arrival of one of the most dazzling bands performing right now. Shaped by the ghosts of the past and wonder of the present, the release is dream pop at its most striking, using the haze and beauty of the genre not to blur songs until they are impenetrable in every sense, but rather to capture the fleeting wonder of new love and emphasize the confusion and disorientation of loss. Morel began to fully process the loss of her mother in 2017, saying, quote, I started having extremely vivid nightmares, reliving certain experiences with my mom that started to take over my life, trapping me in that trauma. Morel explains these dreams are filled with the constant feeling that something or someone so essential to you is missing. Home doesn't feel like home anymore, and something about the world just feels off now. That would form the central core of Endless Pursuit. Moments of joy and comfort are also present throughout the album. Morel says, sometimes a beautiful dream will sneak in past the nightmares, which inspires a lot of my writing as well. Specifically, these dreams I had as a teenager that took place in a past or future life in some kind of parallel universe. I've been thinking about those dreams for 16 years and they still consume me. So that's a bit about this album. We'll listen to a track off the album. I think I'm going to play the first track, which is the eponymous Endless Pursuit, which I really like just because it's a bit of a repetitive kind of trance song that I felt really put me into the right headspace for this album. The reason I picked this album is because I felt myself being drawn down the ethereal end of the goth spectrum more recently, as we all kind of collectively detoxed from darkwave. And for me, that generally splits into two categories. There's the sort of creeping dirge of a band like Soper Aeternus, and then the more 90s infused ethereal wave of like a band like Autumn's Grey Solace. And this one fits more into the second category. And actually, I was thinking today about this, and Sean, I'm glad you brought this up, about this sort of discussion around moving away from darkwave and post-punk. There was this post a few days ago from the band Corlix, which basically was a conversation that played out almost exactly to the way it was described on this podcast. I don't remember if it was the last episode or the episode before that. But somebody messaged the band and said, post-punk is becoming way too oversaturated with too many wannabe bands. The genre is dying quick. And so Corlix said, that's why it's important to always push to expand the genre and blend different elements like we do and many others. And then this person replied, no, this is cheapening the genre and making it less legitimate, which was fucking hilarious to me because it's literally the music sucks now, we have to do something different. But no, don't do something different because it's not real goth. And it was amazing that the cognitive dissonance happening in that conversation. So what I like about this band as far as dream pop goes, they kind of say this in their Bandcamp page, but a lot of dream pop to me does feel like you're looking through a window that's smeared in Vaseline. And not that that's bad. I don't think it makes it impenetrable or it's a negative thing about dream pop. But I've just felt like this is a nice change of pace. And the way that I think they accomplish this, other than not having a lot of reverb, is they incorporate a lot of alternative rock, or at least that kind of feeling into the music. But there's also a lot of other influences being grafted into the album. Actually, tracks like Tangled in Joy and Waving to the Wind surprised me a lot, because the way I received them was that they had an almost like country western twang to them in sort of the vocal delivery and in the guitar as well. And I didn't hate it, which surprised me. And, you know, maybe that wasn't the intent of what they were trying to go for, but that's what it sounded like to me. And I thought it added a really interesting flavor combination, an interesting dimension to the genre that made this exciting to listen to. That song, the song Waving in the Wind, I also thought had a clear Cure influence in the sort of sparkling guitar melodies. And I thought that came up a lot on this album, which was nice because it provided a sort of familiar musical foundation that kind of put the band into this sort of sphere of goth adjacent, or I guess I could say our thing, like we have a technical kind of trademarked. But from that base, then they were able to play around with the formula in interesting ways. So just a few comments on a few of the tracks that stood out to me more than the others. Love Spins Around, I thought was interesting because it switches things up vocally by changing to a masculine lead. And it's a really lush track that felt like the glittering of the shining stars in the night sky, where you had this sort of soaring synth and that bright guitar and this kind of tonal octave that feels as though it becomes brighter and brighter as the song goes on. And it's really like this much needed boost, emotional boost, heading into the next track, which is When the Shadow Smiles Back, which is a much darker evocation of emotion. There's also a heavy alt rock influence on the track that, again, weird. I don't know why this keeps coming up, but weirdly reminded me of the early 2000s emo bands. I think specifically the band I Am Ghost came to mind while I was listening as a kind of touch point of what the song sounded like. But there's this harsher, more angular synth that comes up throughout the song that adds this sort of feeling of dissonance and creates this really melancholic sadness throughout the song, while retaining the dreamlike quality of the genre, and also of thematically that Morel was talking about on the Bandcamp page. Track Torment, I thought, was again another interesting way to play with the dream pop genre, because there was or at least on this album specifically, because that track had a much heavier emphasis on the bass guitar, not really in like a classic post-punk sort of like Joy Division sound, but I thought the prominence of the bass and the complexity of the melodies really gave the track a lot more weight than some of the other songs. Instead of feeling sort of airy and dreamlike, it felt more grounded in the earth in a way. The album closes out with For You I'd Lose It All, which to me sounds like it belongs on like a lighthearted, the soundtrack for a lighthearted 80s romantic comedy that has like a makeover montage and lots of hairspray and shoulder pads. There's this kind of plucky, bouncy guitar, and the vocals are like dripping with honey, and it has this sort of short and sweet, Cure-like song structure that was really a positive note to end the album on. So those are a few of my thoughts. I'll probably have more to say as we go along, but what I loved the most about this album is that they did a really good job of keeping it diverse and interesting while retaining a distinctive sound. And I think they do really well with creating tracks that communicate clear emotional qualities. Not even really through the lyrics is necessarily. I'm sure that's in there as well. I didn't pay as much attention to the lyrics because I had limited time to listen to this. But just the tonality and presentation of the music really puts you into the world that they're creating. And overall, it's so lush and gorgeous, and a really impactful for me. I actually did listen to this a few times. Trey, I told you I only listened to it once, but as I thought back to the last few weeks, I have listened to it a few times. And it really resonated with the kind of miserable situation I've been living through, in which is voiced in the Morel's description of the album. And that really, for me, listening to this during certain phases of this month, adds a sort of, that emotional connection, adds like a this kind of unquantifiable or intangible connective quality to the music that has this sort of deep emotional resonance when I was listening through it, and was both kind of an escape and a reflective sort of experience, and a sort of cathartic experience as well. So that really added a lot to what I would put this album at rating wise. Not that any of our reviews are objective in a sense, but the personal nature of the music and the foregrounding of the emotional presentation of the album was really impactful for me. So as a rating, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5, actually. Really, really enjoyed this album. And it was a nice change of pace from again, the sort of dominant strain of genre music that's coming out or has been coming out in the scene right now. So those are my thoughts. Sean, I would love to hear what you thought about the album or any other thoughts that you have as well. Are you there, Sean? Did my thing crash? Oh, no.
All right. There you are.
Fucking hell.
We were just getting ready to try to come up with some fake responses we could include on that.
Where did I drop off? I don't even... was it the whole thing?
Yes.
It was almost
great.
the whole thing.
Fantastic.
You had just sort of started talking. I don't even know what you're talking beyond that. But you hadn't started going into any of the details.
Great. Well, so Sean, if you would like to share your review or just kind of whatever you want to talk about, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I would have to say Tangled in Joy and Torment were for me the highs and the lows of the album. I definitely got that vibe of Torment from when it comes to like the bass. When it comes to Tangled in Joy, it almost threw me off because of how different it was. And when
especially coming right off the first track.
Right. And when you were describing the meaning behind this album and the emotions that are able to be expressed not just in the words of the description of the album or even in just the songs themselves, but how well they put together those tones and those monotones. And how did you describe it? You said ethereal?
Ethereal, like sort of intangible in the clouds kind of thing.
Which I would definitely agree. I've never come across an album that's ever been able to summarize all those kinds of complex emotions, especially recently, in this kind of way. It's definitely understated and definitely something that I really appreciated from this band.
Yeah. Trey, did you guys hear when I was hear the Corlix thing, or did I drop off before that too?
I do remember you mentioning Corlix. I mean, that's always the tension, though, within any genre of music. Once it has a sort of defined character, defined quality, is you'll have fans that want it to be the static thing that's always the same because it's their comfort, right? It's this thing that they really glommed onto that is their lifeline a lot of times. And any divergence from what grabbed them with it in the first place is usually viewed as a threat because it's, all sorts of things. They talk about selling out. They talk about, whatever they want to say. That's, it's a change that's threatening to the person who's bundled up so much of their identity into a very specific sound. But then there's also plenty of people who are fearful about stagnation and about seeing things that were flashes in the pan in the past that just kept doing the one thing, like the whole lounge revival from the 90s. A big flash in the pan was a very specific sound, and it just didn't go anywhere because it didn't really expand out of that. They didn't really move anywhere. They just kind of did their thing. It was fun for a while, and then it sort of got old and people moved on, and it didn't evolve into anything. It didn't change. It was just something like that. So that's kind of what people look at is all these little micro genres that appear for a couple of years, are popular and vanish. And, again, when it's a genre that is part of a subculture that you feel strongly drawn to, you fear that death of it because of stagnation as well. So it's kind of that tension on both sides.
Yeah, I think like Witch House is another example of that, where people were goths were really worried about it, and it was just it was really an interesting take on goth music and different, but it was, I think, too specific and niche that after a few years, people were kind of like, all right, well, I've heard what I can get out of this, and kind of died off.
Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of bouncing around a little bit. Go ahead.
Witch House. I've actually shared a few Witch House composers that would consider themselves alternative and goth. Not locally as of yet, though I'm trying to work with the music scene here, to not specifically alternative, but the local music scene in general, to see if I can find alternative artists. But the witch house scene isn't really well known in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of rap, obviously, with Pittsburgh scene. And so when they hear witch house, they see the similarities, but they also are surprised by how dark it is. So from an outsider's perspective, they still would consider it goth from their own ears.
Sure, yeah.
They would consider it darker than they're used to, and they would consider it different than rap in general, just because of it being witch house. And it's actually opened up a lot of different styles. Like, I've actually been able to get one of my friends who does his own genre of music here locally. He's more into funk, and R&B, but he's grown to love bands like the original Christian Death and Bauhaus simply because of the way that they're playing the bass, the way that their styles are so offbeat, but also they reel you back in with the chorus.
Right.
And the different takes that you can get from different styles. Like, one of the things that I think we could take from Bauhaus and this Endless Pursuit, this album from Temple of Angels, would be the variation. Goth music has always been about variation in style, variation in lyrics. There's some songs where Bauhaus doesn't even rhyme, There's some lyrics that, from the first time you listen to it, doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
There's some songs on this album that would completely throw you off when you listen to the next song. But it's supposed to be like that. The taste of the variety of how somebody feels when they're in that song is really, I think, the other reason why people can get so fixated on that specific style. It's, I'll just say something personal right now. You don't have to add it into the recording, but if you want, that's all right. I myself, being neurodivergent, have a tendency to put songs on repeat when I get into that specific mood. But I think a lot of people could relate to that simply because it's a good song. And
my wife does that as well. Yeah.
When it comes into getting stuck on that specific song over and over again, there's a difference between hearing it in pop music and hearing it in alternative whenever you go on the radio and hearing it whenever you're playing it by yourself. But the meaning of it behind it is, how do you think, I guess it's a question for everybody and myself, how do you think this album could change the way the goth community could see the different aspects of the emotion that is in Endless Pursuit being shared in that kind of way? And how did you even come across it, Danny?
Well, first I want to say that you're a true goth if instead of just saying Christian Death, you delineate by saying the original Christian Death. I thought that was hilarious, and I love that. I don't remember how I know I found it in my Bandcamp feed, so probably one of the DJs I follow had bought it. You know what? I think actually Scary Lady Sarah from Chicago had bought this album because she does she gets a lot of dream pop and shoegaze stuff for her nights that for Shimmer specifically. So that's where I got it from. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of thematic qualities to the album, emotional qualities to the album that resonate with the goth scene, and there's enough of a musical aspect that coincides with the lineage of goth in some ways that I think it makes it one of those. I mean, it's dream pop, it's shoegaze, but there's also other stuff in there that sort of puts it on that goth adjacent edge. Yeah, and I
definitely sort of equated them, or they reminded me thematically. I mean, musically a lot as well, but thematically to my attitude towards The Cure, which is a goth band, but they've done so much stuff that's not goth too, that is branching out into pop and out into other more, or they're almost breaking out of the alternative shell.
I mean, that's also going back to the Damned, Yeah.
Oh yeah.
With how much the lead singer wants to be goth, and the rest of them are like, do we?
I mean, if you married Patricia Morrison, you're pretty goth, I think. But yeah.
Well, that was the tension, though. It was the lead singer. Yeah. Banyan really pushed that, but the rest of the band wasn't necessarily always on the same page.
Yeah.
Right, and you get that kind of with their songs, the music videos. So I really feel like, have they done a tour yet? That's what I want to know.
The Damned?
Yeah.
Oh, this band.
I don't know.
Yeah,
the Damned? I also don't know.
Not the Damned, but
this band has, because I know. Well, I don't know if they've done a tour. I know they've played live because at least a couple of the comments were talking about being introduced to them from seeing them open for so and so or whatever.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So they definitely mentioned some live gigs. Now, how much of that was local live? Because Austin's a massive live band town, so they could just be playing local gigs in Austin versus touring the country or the world.
Right.
They actually have I've been out there only once, and not really. I've only been I did go to one of their goth clubs, but it was only one time, so it's not a really good sampling. But Austin's a huge music town with quite a diverse bit of music, but they've got live music venues all over the place and bands playing constantly, which is part and parcel with a big college town.
I'm just looking at, while you guys are talking, I'm looking at the if you like Temple of Angels, you may also like section on Bandcamp, because I never really checked that. And there's a lot of really good bands that are referenced and also sort of end up in that goth adjacent thing, because there's Drab Majesty, Slowdive, Nuovo Testamento, whose new album was fucking amazing. Hawaiian T-Shirt, which is like a really fun post-punk band. There's Crew Lies, which is a goth band. So I really thought this album was touching on a lot of interesting things, and I don't know how diverse the recommendations usually are, but that's a pretty wide range of Bandcamp references there.
I'm partly wondering if they make that, if you like this band, you might also like based on other things you've listened to as well. Because I'm looking at my list, which has nothing to do with your list.
Okay,
I don't even recognize it.
It has to be then. Okay, never mind.
Because I've got a lot of bands on here that look like they'd be a lot of my style, but aren't bands that I really know.
Would you think that maybe like a brief synopsis of some of these would be a good idea in the description?
Of some of the bands that were recommended?
I can link them, yeah.
Because if we can start branching bands to other bands, that might be also like a different style, because I've never heard of Hawaiian T-Shirt.
Yeah, they're like a pretty diverse, interesting, like weird post-punk band. But yeah, I can put some links in there. I've also I'm going to do the Sinister Suggestions thing, so I'll have a whole list of other albums to recommend as well.
I've got one as well for Sinister Suggestions.
Okay, cool. Well, Sean, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up about this before Trey shares?
No, I'd be interested to hear what Trey has to say.
Awesome. Take it away, my liege.
All right. I mean, I'm going to echo some of the stuff that's already been said. They definitely fit into that whole, they call themselves dream pop, as you read, Danny, in their intro. And I'd say they did stick with that for the most part, but they weren't I wouldn't say this album was like a dream pop album. It had a lot of dream pop songs.
Yeah, that's
all of the songs had a degree of dream pop influence, ambiance to it, as well as some songs that leaned more post-punk, stuff like that. But they definitely, as has already been mentioned, they do have a fair amount of diversity in their sound. They pull from some stuff from multiple different genres within the alternative umbrella, and also some stuff that I feel was outside of the alternative umbrella.
Yeah.
To make their sound, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm go track by track. So the first track was Endless Pursuit. I believe this is one that was played.
Yep.
So you'll have a listen on that one. This one was instant dream pop vibes. I mean, right away, the guitar, the bass, the lack of, well, at the beginning, the only drums were some little cymbal washes. It was nice. It was very dream poppy. Vocals came in, vocal melody, as well as the guitar melody were both lovely, chiming, reverbed sounds. And then I said that the vocals were coated with just enough reverb to give it that ethereal vibe, but not so much that I was unable to understand it, which is that fine line that I love when they get the right side of it.
Yeah.
And they did a good job on that track. I was able to understand the limited lyrics, but yeah, that was really enjoyable. Unfortunately, I found that track, you kind of mentioned this, Danny, as a positive. For me, it's a negative. I didn't feel the track went anywhere. It was, like you said, repetitive and trance-like, which is good if you want that. But I was just, it oftentimes, sometimes I get into that, and sometimes it just leaves me a little bit wanting.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I found the track absolutely lovely, but it didn't go anywhere. And then it did a fade out too, which is another thing that I kind of view as lazy. So it just became this repetitive thing that
no power slide though.
Then no power slides. Yeah, they stayed out of the power slides. There's actually, I only caught one guitar solo in the whole album, I think. I pointed out on one of the tracks later on, but yeah, the guitar was definitely not prominent. But yeah, no power slides, no guitar wankery at all. So that was the first track. I liked it. It does what a lot of the first tracks of a lot of albums we listen to do, which is like it grabs my interest and it does something interesting, and then it doesn't go anywhere with it. And I feel a little bit cheated. They do redeem it later, but yeah. What?
Would you say you felt a little cheated emotionally?
A little bit, in that it just didn't. There was no evolution of the emotions. It gave me a vibe, and I want that vibe to evolve to keep my interest, and it didn't. It just vibed and then faded.
The musical equivalence of edging is what you're saying.
No, not even that, because I didn't get edging. Usually requires enough evolution, but just doesn't finish you, right?
Yeah, right. Okay.
That's more of. This was more of just like a basic tease, not even getting to edging, just a little bit of a tease. You pique my interest, you like flirt, but it never gets past that. So that's where that was. So that was the first track. Second track, Tangled in Joy. This one I found really interesting, and I think it's already been mentioned a couple times that it was one that threw people as well.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, big Cure vibes with the instrumentations, the drums, the guitars, huge Cure vibe, and then the vocals come in. And after the first track, where, like I said, ethereal reverb, but you're still understanding it, vocals front and center. Yeah. It had enough reverb to make it sound like, a normally produced track, but it was much more upfront, much more poppy. And really, the first thing that came to mind was Shania Twain.
Yeah, yeah. And
that's
so weird.
I think, where you're talking the country vibes. Yeah. And I was like, it definitely had that. It didn't seem like a country song. It still felt post-punk.
Yeah.
But with like a country singer fronting it a little bit.
Yeah. So
but the kind of pop country like Shania Twain. We're not talking deep South country. Yeah. We're talking just that sort of pop country, a little bit poppy with a little bit of a country lilt to it, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
I felt the overall vibe was still very post-punk. I think this one veered away from dream pop. I didn't think it was very dream poppy at all.
Yeah, that made me think about when you said The Cure. Honestly, when you hear some of The Cure's music, like when it comes to Friday,
yep,
that was like the epitome of, if you're not even goth, you know what that song is.
Yeah,
and you can hear it in his voice. There's parts where he just goes out there and it's not even in the lyrics, when he goes and hits those high notes, and you can tell that there's an English guy singing on the radio. When you get Tangled in Joy, you're almost you kind of want to forget that this band is from Austin, Texas, but then you're reminded that this band is from Austin, Texas, and they're sharing these emotions from this perspective with that culture in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did find that one jarring, but interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I did enjoy it. None of these, I didn't have any things that I didn't like on this album, but this one, maybe not a favorite track, but definitely an interesting track that piqued my interest after the tease of the first track. Because the first track is definitely in a genre that I love. I'm a huge dream pop fan. But it didn't go anywhere. And then we had this giant change, like, oh, interesting. This is going to be a ride. So yeah, that one was an interesting shift in pace. Next track 3, Waving in the Wind. Again, this one is a little bit more upfront. Instrumental, still reminding me of The Cure. Not as much as the previous song did. It sort of moved a little bit from that. And it's starting to get a little bit more aggressive. Each track has been sort of building in sort of the aggression and the up-tempo nature of it. I guess aggression, not quite, but sort of the up-tempo. It's getting faster. It's not as repetitive and slow and ethereal as the first track. They're building from there.
Yeah.
So musically, that one was a lot more energetic. I'd say still on the lighter side of post-punk, though. We're not going hard in the post-punk genre yet. We're not getting anywhere near post-punk. Vocals were still very upfront. Not as much with the country lilt, though. This was less Shania Twain and a little more Stevie Nicks. Because it still had a little bit that sort of a folk rocky kind of feel to it. But still veering towards the pop side of things, a little bit more accessible. Not quite as much into the alternative dream pop thing. I liked it. It didn't really stick out to me that much, but it was interesting. I'm enjoying the sort of progression.
I did have a question about what you said, Trey.
Sure.
Why would you suggest that last track was, the last track that you referenced, track 3? Why would you say that Waving in the Wind is a little bit like Stevie Nicks?
It was in the vocal production. More along the lines of Stevie Nicks' ballads.
Right.
But it's that, and Stevie Nicks just came to mind. It wasn't equating or wasn't making me think of any of the major female artists in the post-punk alternative goth genres, though.
Yeah.
It definitely was a voice outside of that alternative space. The Stevie Nicks is an edge case, too. And of course, a centerpiece if you go with... What's the movie, Danny?
83.
There you go. That's the one I was trying to think of. That one where Stevie Nicks was apparently this paragon of gothic.
Yeah.
Which I found fascinating. But that's kind of where I'm coming from with the Stevie Nicks thing, is that sort of a folk rock vibe.
Yeah.
A more upfront pop styling with a little bit more mainstream sensibility.
Yeah, I understood the first and second track on why they were called like Endless Pursuit and Tangled in Joy, but I'm having trouble trying to understand what the message is trying to send with Waving to the Wind.
Yeah, I mean, I can look through the lyrics a little.
Yeah,
there is a little bit in the lyrics. They are talking about the wind in this one a lot, and I think it is more about the growth and traveling and how the wind changes and how you change in the wind. That sort of thing is sort of the vibe I'm getting from the lyrics, just kind of glancing at them briefly while I'm trying to talk here.
Yeah.
I'll get to track 6 and 7, Torment and When the Shadow Smiles Back, which are the darkest tracks on the album, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That was another sort of shift. And I don't think there's a smooth progression up from these. This part is starting lighter and a little bit sunnier, with some melancholy, but also, there's a wide variety of emotions being expressed in this. And these first ones have a little bit more of that
innocence.
A little bit of innocence. I was thinking, I guess innocence does work. I was thinking more like the progression of a relationship, where at the beginning you have not quite the giddiness, but a little bit of that novelty, that sort of wide-eyed wonder being in a thing. Not quite up to Euphoria, though. Euphoria is a little bit later in here. Sort of an adventurous spirit, I guess, in some of these early ones. So we'll go on to track 4, Lost in Darkness. So this one had a really interesting intro. This was the first one that was really bass forward at the very beginning, which, is, of course, one of those post-punk hallmarks.
Mm-hmm.
It also did start moving back from the last 2 tracks back into that more dream pop territory. So the vocals were pulled back a little bit more. They weren't as upfront, a little bit more reverb. Still very clear. The vocals aren't lost in the reverb. We're not drowning at this point, but it's keeping some of the energy, but it's gone a little bit darker. Again, Lost in Darkness. So we're getting a little bit more of a post-punk feel with the heavy bass and the vocals going back into the sort of wash a little bit. The instrumental, though, unlike the first track, which was the intro to their dream pop styling, the instrumentals behind this had a lot more energy. It was sort of keeping some of the energy that was built up in tracks 2 and 3, but moving it into a more sort of dark, not yet getting ominous, but it's getting a little bit more dark than the previous tracks. So yeah, I felt this track was from the dream pop side more along the lines of what I'd be looking for in dream pop. Had a good sense of direction, a good evolution of sound, and it actually ended. So that was nice too. It had it ended very abruptly, but it was a solid ending So I like this track. This was, as I was listening through and sort of rating it, this was the first one I kind of marked as, ooh, I really like this track. This was one of my highlights.
Interesting.
I liked it, but I didn't have a whole lot to say about it. And as we went further on, it lost its crown as the top one. It was the top one of the first 4, but I liked it. It was good. Next, we have track 5, Love Spins Around.
Mm-hmm.
We're sticking with the dream pop territory here, just like the previous track. But we're staying up tempo. We haven't changed the tempo around. We haven't really dipped too deep into the abyss. This one pulls the vocals back a little bit further, though. So this one is starting to lose the vocals. They are understandable, but they did do a big switch up with switching to the male singer.
Yep.
I'm not sure which one, because they mentioned both the guitarist and the drummer did do some vocals. I don't know which one is the singer here.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a really interesting change of pace. I didn't like the male vocalist as much as I like the female vocalist, but that's almost always the case for me. I almost always prefer female vocalists to male vocalists, just in general, in almost every musical genre I listen to. I do love a good male vocalist, but in general, I've always sort of gravitated towards the female vocalists.
Yeah.
And when I do get a male vocalist, I want it to be a low voice. I like my baritones and basses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of the tenor voice. Much as I like Robert Smith, he's got a lovely voice, but it's not my favorite.
Fair
I
enough.
much prefer my Bowies and
Peter Steele.
Peter Steele's definitely up there. I do enjoy my Peter Steele too. And then if we want to go down the country route, I like my Johnny Cash.
Yep.
I like my Chris Christopherson. So, give me those low voices. That's what I generally like. And his voice was in the baritone range. So his voice wasn't bad. It was generally, it stayed pretty comfortably in the baritone, mid to high baritone for most of it. One thing I did enjoy with this track was that they had some great interplay between multiple vocalists at this point. So it not only had the male singer, but it was subtle. But I don't know if her name is Bree or Bray. I'm going to go with Bray because it doesn't have 2 E's. But Bray's vocals as a background vocal was very subtle. I had to listen to it with headphones to really be sure that she was joining, but I'm pretty certain that she was joining with some background vocals.
It added
some
a nice
little
depth.
harmonies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it blended pretty well. It wasn't, it was definitely his voice in the fore and her voice was way back.
Yeah.
Which is why it was subtle, but it was really nice to have that harmony. So I thought that was a really nice touch at the last half of the song, basically. So I did enjoy that one. Didn't quite supplant Lost in Darkness yet, but that was a very enjoyable track, and I did like the change of pace with the surprise male vocalist. So now we're on track 6. This is when we go dark.
Mm-hmm.
So track 6 is when the shadow smiles back. It just started out right out of the gate with a much darker feel.
Yeah.
It does start with the male vocals, though even though he is not the main vocalist in this. His vocals are not very heavily processed, but noticeably processed. They're, kind of filtered down, so it's only getting the low voice side of things, but it's also got a little bit of distortion on it, so it's got a little extra grit in the production.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Bray comes in, she was mixed more towards the front again. So this was, again, not as much in the dream pop territory, so much as getting closer to a pure post-punk goth rock style almost.
Mm-hmm.
Still had a lot of those touchstones of dream pop, but again, the vocals were very prominent. I felt the vocals were not that dissimilar from track 3, Waving in the Wind, in their production and their quality.
Yeah.
But in the general tone of the song, the tenor of the song, we have plunged into the abyss at this point.
Yeah. It's not a dark song in the sense of the way I would describe some goth songs, but it is really desperate, or the void is certainly there in this song. You feel it in your chest.
Yeah. So yeah, this one was really interesting. I found the musical texture to be quite dense. It wasn't, the earlier tracks were very sparse. You're hearing individual guitar notes, you're hearing individual tones of voice and stuff. This was getting almost shoegazy, not quite shoegazy, but it was getting towards that sort of wall of sound density in the general music production. But I really, the sort of the highlight for me of this song was the back and forth interplay, the call and response between Bray's vocals and then the male singer's sort of responses in that sort of distorted, heavily affected style that they were doing, on top of the very dense and tense instrumental grounding. This is also the one that had, as I previously mentioned, this was the guitar solo. It was only a couple of bars, but it was really nice. There wasn't any fancy tricks or anything like that. No power slides. But a nice little thing to see a guitar pop out of the mix and do a little bit of a thing without getting too much into, oh, this is a guitar-focused track. It definitely wasn't. It was definitely focused on the lyrics and the vocals. Like most of their album, most of their tracks were focused heavily on the lyrics. So overall, I'd say one thing I did notice in some of the reviews from the comments, a lot of people were comparing them to Exmal Deutschland.
Oh, really?
This track was probably the only one that kind of gave me that vibe. The rest, I'm like, I don't know. Other than being a female-fronted dark band, I don't really get any Exmal Deutschland from this at all.
No.
This track gives me a little bit of, okay, that comparison wasn't completely off. But yeah, they were mentioned. I looked back to some of their other albums too, and maybe some of the other albums it was stronger. I don't know. I didn't listen to the other albums.
That's an odd. Yeah, I didn't read the comments, but that seems odd to me.
So yeah, that was an interesting track. This probably my favorite track on the album. Not 100% sure. There's some other competitors in there, but this one was a strong outing by the band.
Well, on that note, maybe I'll toss this song into the episode just to have a second track in there.
It'll give us a big contrast, yeah. All right, so now track 7, Torment. This one is possibly even darker than the first one, than the previous one, track 6.
I have to be biased. It's my favorite.
That's fair. The bass and drum parts at the beginning of this track gave me actually a bit of a death rock vibe. Just at the beginning, though, the vocals are definitely deep into the dream pop territory again, but it wasn't on the whole. It was getting closer to the standard rock format of being drum and bass, grounding the harmony and the rhythm, with the vocals and the guitars and synth work a little bit, but the synth work here was mostly just washes and pads. There wasn't a lot of melodic synth work.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I did think it had an interesting, almost death rock vibe at the beginning until the vocals came in and it dove into dream pop territory again. Dream pop / shoegaze, because again, it's doing the similar thing as track 6, where it's got a pretty dense, pretty tension-filled wash of sound. I was seeing the drummer start to stretch their legs a little bit in this track. There was some nice sections with some solid tom work that kind of reminded me of some of Budgie's drumming with the Banshees.
Okay.
Had a little bit of that, not quite as tribal as Budgie tends to get, but some of that more interesting, complicated work on the drums. It isn't just the standard kick snare, post-punk beat that a lot of the previous tracks were gravitating towards. But yeah, I did comment on this one more so than the last one, where this one was definitely getting more towards that wall of sound shoegaze territory, with the dense and textured feel, especially since the vocals kind of went back into the mix too. So the vocals, this was one where the vocals were probably the most buried. And it really, the vocals and the instruments and the drums were almost all sort of one sonic tapestry that didn't have anything really sticking out, just as sort of a wash of feeling and emotion, which I guess is not a poor way of exhibiting a concept of torment, where all the sort of things happening in your life are just kind of blurring together into a sort of painful morass.
Yeah.
So they were kind of sonically evoking that idea, which I thought was interesting. So track 8, Secret Place. So I thought as it started off, this track was reminding me of the first track. It was definitely starting strong with the dream pop feel, had the mood lighten up a lot. I mean, obviously with the previous 2 tracks being as dark as they were, you've got a lot of, the low bar is pretty low to get a lighter mood at this point. So this lifted out of the gloom of the past couple of tracks. Yeah, so it started with dream pop for about the first minute, very textured. The drums did come in pretty powerfully at about the minute mark, which was nice, but it didn't break out of the sort of dream pop feel. So it was definitely a little bit more up tempo, but still very strongly a dream pop feel. The one thing I did say is that this track is kind of what I wanted the first track to be. It had that dream pop, but then it had that sense of motion, that sense of evolution, a sense of being a sort of completed thought rather than being a great idea that they didn't then take anywhere. Whereas the first track was a cool loop that was looped.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing when I write music, I get stuck on. Is I get a cool loop and then I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, right.
And I just play it and I enjoy it and then it fades out and I don't do anything with it. So I definitely really enjoyed this track. Next track 9, Stay. So this track was an interesting track because I thought it was kind of a drummer showcase. The rest of the music kind of fell by the wayside and the drummer was really interesting on this one and it almost felt like a drum solo with musical backing to me. The drumming was pretty powerful and a lot of really interesting drum work. It changed a lot throughout. It wasn't just getting into a groove and playing. So I like that a lot. The bass started out pretty strong as well, but again, as usual, the bass did get pulled back when the rest of the instruments were in, which was too bad. But I really did enjoy the fact that it let the drummer stretch their legs.
Yeah.
Musically speaking, especially with the vocal, we're still solidly in dream pop realm. So it still has the ethereal quality of the reverb. It was still fairly up-tempo and kind of upbeat. But with that, the melancholy edge that most of this album has had. So it didn't get happy by any stretch of the imagination. But I did enjoy letting another member of the band kind of shine, I felt. With the rest of the band kind of supporting the drummer in this case.
Yeah.
So I like that for a good change of pace.
Yeah, definitely.
Track 10 is The Hill. I thought this was another poppy song. So it was getting, starting to verge out of the dream pop territory, more similar to tracks 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Vocals were fairly forward, still reverby, so not quite as forward as those second and third tracks. I did feel this one reminded me again, like track 3, a little bit of Stevie Nicks or that sort of a folk rock kind of front and center poppy veering on a mainstream vocal production. It was a nice track, but other than that, I didn't really have a lot to say about it. It didn't grab me, but it was enjoyable. It didn't take me out of the album at all. And then track 11, For You, I'd Love It All. This one I felt was going back to the more straight up post-punk sound. It wasn't really doing the dream pop as much. We brought the male singer out again, another good showcase for him. It's actually a standout track for the male singer. I thought he did a really great job in this. Unlike the previous track, I felt they let him stretch his legs a little bit. He had a good solid vocal melody through the verses, which was sort of a standard, a little bit more melodic than your goth voice number 1, so it wasn't monotone at all, which was good, but it was limited. It didn't have a lot of stuff, but then when it came into the bridge and into the vocals, they let him really let loose, and he put a lot of emotion into his voice. I mean, it wasn't like going crazy when we're talking screaming here. We're talking, but more impassioned singing.
Sure.
Moving up in register, getting into more head voice. And the track was a good finishing track. It was finishing in a more upfront post-punk style sound, not quite as dream pop, but still had that sort of feeling to it. So another great track on this album.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my take on this album.
If you had to give it a rating, what would you do?
I would say probably somewhere in the 3.5.
Okay.
To maybe 4 stars out of 5. It was a solid album. It wasn't like I need to. It's
a good 7 out of 10.
It's not. I need to get everything that they've ever produced, but I did really enjoy it. I did end up purchasing it.
I'd say I'd give it a 4 out of 5.
Okay, cool.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
It's actually the Internet Archive, which I discovered has a magazine rack where they're archiving magazines.
Ooh.
And I did a quick search for goth in there. And they've got several issues of Gothic Beauty and Propaganda.
Really? Okay.
Which I thought was an interesting little discovery. So for those of you who want to dig back into some old classic zines, I'm sure they've got other ones. Those are just ones that came up when I searched for goth as the quickest and easiest first thing to search for. But yeah, the Internet Archive.
I never thought of doing that.
Magazine rack. Yeah, that's why I wanted to mention it, because I'm familiar with the Internet Archive. It archives old web pages and some other stuff like that. But I'm like, oh, they have magazines. Trying to remember if it was an NPR thing that mentioned it, or it was probably on my Google feed, because I read through that regularly, and there's various things that pop up that might have mentioned it. But mentioned it had magazines. I'm like, oh, I should check this out. And lo and behold, there were some interesting.
They've got New Grave in there, Deja Vu.
What
else? Magna, some other stuff. Yeah, I'll definitely have to look through this. That's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, so I thought that would be fun for people to dig back if they want to have some trips down memory lane if they're into the zine scene in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Definitely got some stuff they could dig in. So that
or
was cool.
Come over to my house and take a look through.
Yeah. Yes, let's all go to Danny's house.
Well, we'll have to go to Scary Lady Sarah's house, actually, because I've heard she has quite a collection.
Oh, I'm sure she does.
Yeah.
We actually do have some of those available at our local library.
Nice.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, we have a whole magazine selection. Quite a few of them actually have some of the originals. So that's really nice. There's little things I've noticed in the Pittsburgh area where they'll have stuff like that. But like I said earlier, it's more of like a general acceptance of all art styles. And I haven't yet to find a specific group, band, or like location that specifically focuses on dark alternative. But there are some art styles and some magazines and things available. In fact, one of the locations that I recommended for Grota, the Goth Residency of the Arts, was the library. They have a interchangeable quarterly gallery there, where they'll focus on individual artists locally or just even selected by the board to all different kinds of art styles as well. So there's many different selections and stuff. It's almost like with, a big city like Chicago or Pittsburgh or New York, there's always something happening. It's just a matter of finding it. So locally, I do know that there's a lot of people that have like cafe bars or vinyl record stores and bars, and they kind of mix everything together where you can go through some of the original records and find some really nice post-punk or dark wave artists, and get some original limited edition vinyls here locally. And then they do have some magazines. So that's just what popped into my head.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I'll always recommend checking out your local library. So,
I'm a huge proponent of local libraries, and I do a lot with mine, especially online when I discovered Libby and downloading audiobooks and regular books. And it was even more exciting when I discovered you could get magazines on Libby as well. So that was fun for me. But my experience with magazines in most libraries that I've been to have been a lot of mainstream stuff. So if you want to listen to your read your Rolling Stone and GQ and Consumer Reports, it's great for that. But trying to find underground stuff, especially on the zine area, it was a little bit thinner on the ground. Then I've got my like Pianist magazine and computer music and Sound on Sound and stuff like that. Some photography magazine, stuff like that. So I like to grab that out of the library.
I'd like to hear more about your penis magazines. What was that?
I know you would. Pianist. As in one who plays the fortepiano.
That would work really well in the Warhol Museum.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. But okay, so for my music suggestion, this was actually one I just ran across just a few days ago as one of my Bandcamp suggestions. So it's an artist, I'm sure I'm going to butcher her name, but Linnea Hjerten. Then her album, which is her first full-length album, is Systrar. So the description here is born from the synthesis of Swedish folk melodies and ritual ambient. Linnea Hjerten's debut album, Systrar, or Nine Sisters, is a wordless invocation of primordial energy, a psychoacoustic gateway to altered states of consciousness.
Oh.
Each of the 9 tracks brings us deeper into the cycle of spiritual death and rebirth, stripping away the old to make way for the new. With a musical maturity far beyond her years, Hjerten channels the ethereal beauty of Dead Can Dance, the spellbinding chants of Kari Rauslaten, and the minimalist Nordic atmosphere of Forndom, who is one of the bands that was on my list of recommended bands after listening to the previous album. That was one of the ones in my section of recommended bands, which is why I think it's based on the individual. As a natural extension of her spiritual practices, Linnea Hjerten reached a point where her melodies had to break the confines of her private sanctuary. The compositions had initially served a wide range of purposes as grounding forces, as enhancements of energies, and as manifestations of intent to release that which no longer served her. With an expansive love for diverse genres, from ambient to folk, from jazz to various forms of metal, her music is less about the style and more about a different quality, sound, or purpose. Trained in music engineering, Linnea relishes the creative journey from inner melody to final production, unearthing the exact tools needed to craft the perfect musical space.
Well, you certainly have my attention. I'll have to check that out.
It's I listened to it several times after I got it initially. It was on my Bandcamp main page.
Send me the link to that.
So there you go.
Well, with that, I'm going to wrap up this part of the episode, at least. Thank you both for doing this with me. It's been 2 months since I've done an episode, and it's really nice to get back into it. Yeah, I and just on a personal note, I really don't think I can put into words how wonderful and meaningful this has been to me, just this hour or whatever, personally, because the last month has been a hellscape, and so getting to spend time with both of you and just hang out and chat about goth shit has been really lovely and healing.
I would say centering.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time, and this was just fun for me. It's nice that we can make it into a podcast, but this is just fun. So,
yeah.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you.
Well, you know what that means. It is time for my rapid fire Sinister Suggestions, where I share a concise recommendation for a album that came out recently with a little snippet of a song from that album. And as always, there were far too many albums and EPs and singles to effectively listen to and review. And I wish I had more time, but we are where we're at. And regardless, I have quite a lineup of suggestions. So let's get into it. Well, right at the beginning, it looks like I've got more dream pop and shoegaze recommendations. This first album I'm recommending is called The Line or the Curve by Octavian Winters, and perhaps I oversimplified the album a bit by calling it dream pop. That's not entirely true. While there are certainly ethereal aspects to this album, some tracks rely more heavily on languishing guitar, thick, unnerving bass lines, and punchy drums, almost reminiscent of Comely's era Lacuna Coil, as you get that metal-inspired goth rock with a raw synth backing over the organic sounds. In fact, I get a lot of late 90s vibes from this album in the way that it blends so many different genres into a distinctive package. Precisely the kind of music I fell in love with in the early 2000s, but updated and modernized for today. On the more dream pop tracks, you get that shivering guitar and surreal otherworldly ambiance of a Cocteau Twins, guiding you through the celestial heights of the subconscious. Vocally, I'm reminded of Collide. We get a lush, serpentine vocal that soars at times and drags you into the earth at others, along with an occasional male backing vocal that provides just enough edge when needed. As a whole, the album feels as if you've been gifted obtuse occult knowledge through the medium of a dream, visited by a spectral host of master practitioners levitating through sacred geometry. It's definitely a trip worth taking. Next up, it's guess what? More dream pop. Gifts of the Earth's self-titled album out of Germany cuts their dream pop nose candy with a heavy dose of pop sensibility. Punchy, snappy percussion gives way to slick, swirling, glittering guitar, punctuated by various synth textures and auxiliary percussive elements. The vocalist is even-toned and detached, dissociated, yet as warm as the setting sun on a summer's day. Post-punk, indie rock, and shoegaze all make an appearance in one way or another, evincing a collage of mythological imaginings. I'm very, very excited to see where this band goes next, but you don't have to wait till then. Definitely check this one out. Depression is a state of being I'm deadly familiar with, and it's the stated condition under scrutiny by Gothnetic out of New Brunswick. Their new track, Flowers, is musically closer to the band Mesh than what I'd expect from Darkwave, with their sharp, rattling synth and drum machine and melodic vocals. It's well structured for the dance floor, in kind of a similar way to Pretentious Moi, and I think similar to those 90s bands as well. It's not overly produced. This is a solo project, so you've got one person doing everything, and depending on your predisposition to hi-fi or lo-fi, you may or may not like the sound of this track. But personally, it does remind me of the general texture and feel of 90s music production. Even, sort of in the vein of bands like early Crew Shadows, for example. So if you're looking for a throwback, in my opinion, this is a great artist to check out. This next album is Wax Venus by the Frozen Charlottes. This isn't a new album. It was actually released in 2019, but it's new to me and maybe new to you. I discovered this band over our podcast hiatus and was immediately struck by the description, which stated they are a psychedelic death rock band, which seemed intriguing to me. And actually, if you listen to this podcast, you know that we've been talking about looking outside the kind of standardized dark wave and post-punk that's dominated the scene for a few years. From my understanding, the band started in the most Californian death rock way possible, which was by accident, with somebody who had no previous singing experience and somebody with no guitar playing experience. Now, when people think about death rock, usually only Theater of Pain is the first kind of sound that pops into their head. This is not that. This is seances. This is piles of teeth. This is a room of haunted dolls staring at you from every direction. This is bugs crawling under your skin. There's such a wide range of influences on this album, from unnerving, razor-sharp guitar lines to hypnotic, serpentine percussion. There's unrelenting, grinding metal, asymmetrical death rock. Vocally, there's a touch of Ava O, but the vocalist can soar into psychedelic-infused heights or drag you down into hell. It's an incredible album that deserves more exploration than this quick soundbite. But if you're looking for something unique, something fresh, something exciting, then this is it. From Portland, Oregon comes Angels of the Void with a pair of singles. The first is Pages, a 70s infused fever dream replete with haunted organs and spectral vocals. There's a real horror punk undertone to this track that blends in such a sinister way with the kind of evil carnival elements on the track. The second track is Repent, which sounds to me much more like a dark punk kind of thing, sort of in line with a band like Ferox, with its grungy, crawling grime that hits you right in the gut. Really, both of these tracks are incredible, and I'm waiting impatiently for more from this group. Switching gears completely is the new track from German-based Yakima, Jera. Their new track Fire is eminently danceable 80s neon dream. Retro drum machine creates the backbone for this vector wave fever dream. Instrumentally, you can definitely hear the Joy Division influence, while the vocals are on a whole other level, visceral yet ethereal, intimately haunting and uncannily familiar. The vocal performance touches your very soul. It's a great track that's unique in their catalog, and certainly slots nicely into their dark dance aesthetic. Another band out of Portland, Oregon is Nightsister with their new single, Die Young. The synth work on this album immediately struck me as reminiscent of old school synth pop in the vein of Solitary Experiments or even early Cruise Shadows. Wispy, intangible vocals float underneath a minimal percussive backbone and catchy as fuck melodies. Allusions to twin tribes would not be amiss amongst the playground of mopey darkwave fit for an autumn evening in the cemetery. To me, this track embodies the way darkwave took the spirit of the morose, lugubrious goth identity and made it their own while keeping that melancholic DNA. Next up is Vosh out of Washington, D.C. with their debut album Vessel, and it is a triumph. Determined to be unbound by a single genre, Vosh moves effortlessly through Ministry and Killing Joke style aggression, and Kalen Mikla and Kill Shelter style darkwave. The album is sensual and deviant, haunting, sinister, and subversive. The star of the album certainly lies in the vocals. You can absolutely hear the influence of artists like Diamanda Galas and Lisa Gerard in the soul-wrenching performances that slither under your skin. She cackles, she intones, she summons, she is possessed. She traverses decades. It's a hypnotic performance that is deftly supported by the ever-shifting musical landscape. This album is an incredible ride and a shining star in alternative music. Don't miss out on this one. Now, if you're looking for complete 80s synth rapture, then the new single from Mortal Boy, titled Anhedonia, is just the thing for you. Named after the complete lack of ability to find joy or pleasure in life, as is experienced by those suffering from depression, Anhedonia's oscillating synth captures the hollow, colorless repetition that marks this condition. Dispassionate vocals weave their way through a dense thicket of sound, ripped right from the geometrical synthwave of 80s retro romanticism. It's a cry for euphoria and intimate emotion that many of us can relate to in these cataclysmic times, and I'm definitely here for it. Voilok out of Moscow is next up, and this album puts to bed any doubters that want to pigeonhole Russian post-punk. The album opens with a beautifully unnerving track that utilizes minor octaves in order to conjure that feeling of standing on unstable ground. The album is a refreshing take on the genre, with touches of heavy metal and goth rock a la the Sisters throughout. Rather than feeling cold and desolate, this album has a rich texture of burgundy and dark grays. Rather than being grounded and minimal, it lifts the veil on soaring, lush soundscapes. I lament only having discovered this band now and look forward to digging through their back catalog. From Virginia, we've got Petrified Entity with their new single, Alone. If you're upset about the conspicuous lack of recommendations with Joy Division-styled bass lines and angular, catchy guitar, then this one is for you. Vocals sung from the bottom of a catacomb lament over a minimal yet danceable melody. But Petrified Entity isn't a one-trick pony. Other recent singles like Parallel Lines come across as a rare B-side industrial track dug up from the bottom of a cassette tape bin. If you're into throwback sounds in the vein of Joy Division, as I said, then this one is for you. Finally, we have Obsidian's new album, 19 Dead. And where better to brew a witch's cauldron of misery, darkness, and despair than the sunny state of Florida. 19 Dead is an album of many faces. There's influences as wide-ranging as the mean pogo drums of the Sex Pistols, synth that feels inspired by bands like The Frozen Autumn, vocals haunted by the ghost of UK Decay. And as existentially serious as this album is, with lyrics about the students who died at Parkland, memorials for the deaths of personal friends, and tales of mortuary work, I can still hear a sprinkle of the kind of kooky death rock of 45 Grave. But the album is pretty diverse overall, with fat bass lines, cyberpunk-inspired synth, Ausgang-styled guitars, dirge-like laments with plenty of genre staples like spooky choirs, minor keys, and wailing banshees. As well-produced as this album is, the sparse structure of the instrumentation lends to a 70s punk DIY feeling. You can tell I really like this album. There's a spirit of the past that is reimagined here, and the subject matter, I feel, is exactly the kind of lyrical content I look for in goth music. Sadly, that brings us to the end of this episode. Our next episode will be at the beginning of next month, as it always is, and we will be joined by Willow Scarlett, who is a musician, a designer, and a desi-goth. So we'll be talking with Willow about diversity in goth music, the availability of and the experience of goth culture in India, what ways goth aesthetic has taken inspiration from minority communities, and whether or not that is appropriative, along with many other topics. Of course, if you enjoy this podcast, you would like access to our Discord, early access to episodes, access to t-shirts, and other kinds of corporeal objects, please visit our Patreon, which is patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. I ask every episode because the Patreon is the bloodline of this podcast. Without it, this content no longer exists, and there is so much more I would like to explore within this space that I deeply appreciate all of your support. So thank you so much for your time, and until we meet again, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.